Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com. Here with the Stamina Necro build, one bar that I am actually really enjoying. If you know anything about me, Stamina and Magic and Necro are my least favorite in PvE. I find them overly complicated. I have to do a gazillion bar swaps, and it's just a lot to manage, especially when I'm streaming. It's just too much control. But not with a one bar build. I also think Stamina Necro has a skill that's slept on, that it's an absolute carry, whether you're leveling or whether you're at endgame. So this is going to be a deep dive into Oakensoul or not, Stamina Necro, a lot of different flexible abilities, gear, champion points, and more. So if you want to pick up a build that will actually work in the content that you're doing, that will hit like a truck, heal, be very easy to play, and be very survivable, it's actually the Stamina Necro, and what I think is one of the strongest with the Oakensoul. Let me explain why. Before we do that though, if you find this video helpful, smash that thumbs up for me and leave me a comment on what you like specifically, as it will help this video grow. Stamina Necro. Okay, so a lot to go over and why. I'm going to go over the skills first, and this will make a lot more sense as to why I use the gear sets I do if we touch on the skills first. First thing we're going to go up is the main spam build, and you have a tons of choices, but for the average player, and this is who the build is intended for, I highly recommend Ruinous Scythe. This costs 2,231 magic. It shoots out in a cone in front of you, 7 meters. So it slashes like a scythe. It does pretty decent damage. It does bleed and applies the hemorrhage status effect, which also does damage. And it sets enemies off balance for 7 seconds. Keep in mind that the off balance has about a 15-second cooldown. The big thing here about Ruinous Scythe is it heals you for the first enemy hit and a small additional amount of health for every additional enemy hit, up to 5 times. This ability does scale off your max health, but even on a very low health pool, this thing carries my healing so much that I don't even use vigor most of the time. So this is a great skill when you're leveling, when you're at endgame, you don't trust your healer, or you're in a pug group and you don't really want to slot a whole bunch of heals because, well, you're using a one bar. Every single bar slot is precious. Ruinous Scythe is your go-to. Another skill you can use that will actually do more damage but will not have any healing component is Venom Skull. This is going to lob a poison skull, 28 meters, costs a lot less stamina. Every third cast of this ability does 20% increased damage, and while slotted, casting a Necro ability while you're in combat will count towards this cast. So as you're rotating through Necro abilities, this will sporadically do a lot more damage, and is very nice if you don't need the healing. So PvE is very contextual, and that's what I want you to get out of this video is I constantly swap out skills for what's going on. If I have a trustworthy healer and we're doing a dungeon, I'm going to use Venom Skull. If we're on a trash pack and I need to clear a bunch of mobs instantly, I'm going to use Ruinous Scythe. So swap them in and out, but those are the two options that you have. Now, a very interesting choice that you have, and what I highly recommend for solo builds, or again, uncoordinated groups and players, is Razor Caltrops from the Alliance War. What this is going to do is big, huge AoE. It does have a hefty stamina cost and it lasts 10 seconds, but it's going to do Major Breach. Major Breach is around 8% or so increased damage. If you don't know, mobs have 18,200 resistances. So typically tanks and or healers strip this resistance to almost nothing. This is extremely relevant on medium armor users. Why medium armor users specifically? Well, because in the medium armor skill line, you do not have anything for penetration where light armors do, or the light armor caster does. So for you, getting any ounce of penetration as a magic user is a very big bonus to your damage. So that is one way to get Major Breach, to do a lot of AoE damage, and it's very easy to keep up and maintain assuming you have good stamina. But there's actually another ability that sounds very odd, but you'll stick with me on this as I explain kind of the hybridization of the Necro, and that's Unnerving Boneyard. This cost a whopping 3,780 magic on this character. It lasts for 10 seconds, it's a 6-meter radius, and 28 meters is where you can chuck this on the ground. It consume a corpse that's going to do more damage. So that's really, really nice as a way to feed our corpses and to do increased damage. And then then it does have a nice synergy when you're playing with other players. The interesting thing is here is, can you sustain the magic cost of this ability? If you can, it will outperform Razor Caltrops, and it'll keep your stamina pool, your main pool, freed up for even more damage, dodge rolls, and or healing. So 2 choices: Unnerving Boneyard, you can sustain, great. Razor Caltrops, if you cannot sustain, and you're going to rely more on your stamina pool. The Necro specifically really takes advantage of the hybridization because you have so many good magic and stamina abilities. It's really just a coin toss. And that's how you solve the Necro's sustain issues, is using your off stat frequently to fill up your main stat to make it so much easier to sustain. That's how I found out. Now, we've been talking about corpses a lot, so let's talk about the obvious, and that's Skulking Blast Bones. Notice this is the magic one, because the magic ability, not the stamina, will actually hit harder. Every second the skeleton spends chasing his targets, it's going to increase the damage. Yes, we're going to be playing in melee, but this also helps not only our damage if we're far away, it also helps our sustain because it's 2700 magic. So casting this over and over isn't going to completely drain our resource pool, and I fell in love with Skulking Blast Bones, the magic version, making it much, much simpler and much easier to sustain very long lasting fights. And so what that's going to do is going to feed a corpse, right? So you can use the corpse for a variety of different abilities. We already talked about Unnerving Boneyard. You can feed that after a corpse is laying on the ground to suck up and do a lot more damage. The next one it will feed off of, and what I highly recommend using, is Detonating Siphon. This thing is a beast. It has 28 meter range and the radius is 5 meters. You're gonna suck up a corpse and do a ton of disease damage over 12 seconds between all the enemies between you and the corpse, like a little tether. And when you recast it, it's going to do an additional amount of disease damage. So you can kind of spam cast it to get a little bit more AoE damage. It's not gonna outperform your Ruinous Scythe, but it's something to add a little bit more disease damage when you're gonna maintain this anyways. Another added benefit, while you have it slotted, you do increase damage by 3%. So making it a must-have go-to slottable on your main bar. So I don't find this really replaceable on my bar because it's such a hard-hitting thing and it does so much for us. One of the reasons to constantly use those corpses is a passive here, Corpse Consumption. When you use an ability on a corpse, you generate 10 ultimate and it has a 16-second cooldown. So constantly cycling your blast bones into those 2 abilities is a great way to constantly generate ultimate and feed into this Necromancer actual play loop, and it's a lot more fun with just one bar because it's something I can understand, I can actually execute. And so it kind of feeds into each other, and I'll show you this in the rotation. And now we have the last ability, and this is a flexibility depending on your skill level, what you need, and why, and who you're playing. Oakensoul gives you major force, but it doesn't give you minor force. How you can get minor force, which is increased critical damage, is by using a skill like Barb Trap from the Fighters Guild. Some other advantages to using this skill and slotting it is it gives you increased weapon and spell damage for slotting on your front bar, which is nice. And especially solo, you generate 3 ultimate whenever you kill an enemy. So having that solo, absolutely fantastic. It is single target, so it's not going to be a great AoE skill, but it's very, very useful if you need this for high damage. There's some other gear sets I'm going to touch on later that will give you this buff as well, but if you use this, it can free up some other options. Now, you have some other options in terms of survivability. I have the wrong morph here, but Echoing Vigor. This is a heal over time. You would use the Resolving Vigor, which is a much better heal for solo arenas. Echoing Vigor off heals a little bit of your allies and companions, so that's better for group play. But this is from Assault skill line right here. If you hate PvP and you don't want to get the skill, that's fine. Necro has a very, very good heal in 2 different forms. One being the Spirit Guardian, that's going to do a decent amount of healing, but it's going to reduce your damage taken by 10%. The other morph of this is really fantastic. You have Mortal Coil, which you can suck up a spirit and get magic and stamina recovery, and it's going to increase your healing while slotted, and it's going to heal you. Incredible. And one of the best burst heals in the game, Resistance Flesh. Probably you'd want to use Vigor, but those are some options. Now, in case you have a gear set that's going to give you the minor force, what I found to be the second highest damage producing dot on my bar is Skeletal Archer. This is going to be 16 seconds. You can precast it. It's going to do physical damage every 2 seconds. It's going to kind of ramp up the damage over time. This thing was on my top 5 or 6 damage sources on a parse dummy, and I was getting right around 80,000 to 85,000 doing a bunch of parses with this, and this exact loadout. So this is what my bar would look like if I was going to do a parse. I'd put the Skeletal Archer down. I put Detonating Siphon. I would go ahead and drop Ruinous Scythe because I don't need to take any, I'm not taking any damage. I put the skull here, and this would be my bar. 2 magic skills, Skulking Blast Bones, and as soon as the corpse would leave up, I would take it into Unnerving Boneyard, fire off of Blast Bones again, fill it with Detonating Siphon, and there you go, maintaining Skeletal Archer. Now, ultimates of choice. If you're doing parsing and you want the most damage per second, it's probably Shooting Star, because it does a lot of damage in a stationary period. And with major heroism coming from Oakensoul, you're getting it up so frequently, it'll pretty much outparse anything. When you're playing in groups, there's an obvious choice, and that's Pestilence Colossus. This doesn't do as much damage. It costs a little bit more ultimate, but it benefits your entire party because it applies major vulnerability to any enemy hit, and that's for 12 seconds. So you swap this in when you're playing with groups. If you're a new player and struggle with survivability, which is a problem if you're using Oakensoul and you don't have a whole bunch of heals slotted, consider taking Ren from Dual Wield. It's a very slept on, underrated skill. It's going to do bleed damage 16 seconds and heal you for 51% of the damage done. So it's going to slice in front of you. Beware, there is a cast time on this. But it's great because it carries your survivability. And when you have major heroism running back to you constantly, bang, you're getting filled up with health. And you don't really have to slot a heal a lot of times because Ruin a Scythe and Rend in combination is enough to not have to need Pale Order, and you can stick to Oakensoul. So let's show you what this would look like, kind of just in a little parse situation, and walk you through the thought process. So I'm going to fill up on gas here. I got a full ultimate. Let's go to a 3 mil parse dummy. Okay, so if I look at my character right now, what I'm going to try to do is use my Blast Bone, and about every 2 cooldowns, global cooldowns, about a second and a half, I have to recast it. So I'm going to try to cast it and start, and feeding my abilities, my Boneyard and my Detonate and Siphon with the remains of my Archer and or my Blast Bones. So how I start this off is I cast this out of combat, cast Blast Bones out of combat, and I drop a Meteorite about to land. Now I have one little critter, so I can summon that up, and light attack, and then I use it to get my Detonating Siphon. I just keep that up. 1, 2, Blast Bones. Keep this Archer up, keep my Blast Bones up, 2, and then 1, 2, Siphon. Blast Bones. 1, 2, Boneyard, Blast Bones. So 1, 2, Archer, Blast Bones. And we have to get this guy up. I'm going to use a tripod and Boneyard. So you can see it's kind of a very simple weave here, about 1, 2, and then you're casting either Blast Bones or you're casting a damage over time. 2, suck it up, Blast Bones, Archer, this guy, same sort of thing. 1, 2, and then 2 globals. Blast Bones come down. 1, 2, and then suck this guy up. You casting it because you want to get increased damage for using this. This is the weave. You don't have necessarily an ultimate with this. So really you're just kind of watching your cooldowns and making sure you have those up even through execute phase. So right now I don't really have to keep up a whole lot of other dots. So we're just going to go Blast Bones. This. I don't need to recast anything, and then bang, we should be done. And that's it. So about 1 or 2 Blast Bones, and you should be maintaining a dot or doing your Archer and rinse and repeat. If you find yourself doing Blast Bones over and over, you're probably not doing the right weave. Maybe 2 to 3, but generally you're maintaining your dot, and you're not doing a whole lot of spammables. You're doing a whole lot of Blast Bones and dots. But this is a lot simpler than a 2-bar build. Okay, so now we got the skills covered. Let's go over the gear, which is a little bit complex. I'm going to give you a lot of options to flex in and out depending on your skill level, what you're doing, and why. Okay, we're going to talk about what to use meta strat wise for probably the most damage out there, since that's what y'all are going to want to know first. So I'm going to stick with high damage first, give you some substitutes, and then we're going to go to solo play, what I use and why. Number 1, we already talked about Barb Trap. Well, this gear set, Togvins, is fantastic because at max stats you get minor force, plus you get a lot of critical. The nice thing about Togvins compared to other proc sets is, well, you don't have to necessarily babysit light attack. So if you miss 1 or you miss 2, as long as you have your damage over time enough, it will do critical damage, will keep the procs maintained. Plus it can happen every half second. If you're running 2 or 3 dots at a time, you're much likely to keep up and maintain the 10 stacks in something like Kinra's. So consider this a go-to set. It comes from Frostwall. You're going to want to collect this ASAP. It'll free up that Barb Trap slot for something like Skeletal Archer. Next setup is Reliquins or Perfected Reliquins. This is going to be the best pure single target pound for pound 5-piece out there right now. Your light and heavy attacks essentially build up these stacks doing a ton of physical damage. So you can maintain 10 stacks and get a massive amount of single target damage. Now this setup is really intended for parsing, hard mode dungeons, or veteran trials where bosses last a very long time and it's really single target focused. These are 2 great sets for it. So let's talk about alternatives in case you don't have this, but I would consider this the meta loadout for 1-bar stand builds. If you don't have access to Togvans for whatever reason, you could always go with a 5-piece Medusa. The downside of Medusa is you would have to put one heavy on your body, but it would give you minor force at all times. You'd still use the same weapons. I prefer dual wield. It's going to give you a lot of crit chance, and it's going to give you minor force at all times. A great alternative to Togvans, especially since this is base game and it comes from Arc's Corinium. We have a new craftable set, and that's called Order's Wrath from the High Isles, or you can buy it from traders or get a buddy to craft it for you. You'll notice that the 5-piece gives more increased critical damage than something like Medusa's, and the 5-piece bonus added increases your crit damage and crit healing by 8%, and it's not a named buff. So you can actually still slot Barb Trap and stack this Order's Wrath 5-piece on top of it. Downside, it's not going to give you that free bar slot, which is really, really nice in the veteran trials and/or dungeons. An overland set coming from Somerset is Griffin's Ferocity. So this is kind of a beginner set, but it does give you minor force and minor expedition, increasing your critical damage down by 10% and also your movement speed. So this is after dealing direct damage. You can pretty much maintain this 100% of the time, but you'll notice the 5-piece doesn't have any crit with it, doesn't have anything the other big dogs give. But consider this a flex spot for Togmans or Medusas if you need something just to get you by to slot it. Another great alternative for folks looking for arena sets or survival is Briarheart. This comes from Hrothgar, and the 5-piece does, when you deal critical damage, you're going to get a flood of weapon and spell damage, but you're going to get healed for a brief time, 10 seconds, for a decent amount of health while this is proc. So for 10 seconds, you're going to get a flood of weapon damage and spell damage, and you're going to be able to heal every time you crit. Very useful for a beginner that it kind of gets flustered when they're taking damage, because your damage over times are just going to proc this, your blast bone is going to proc this, and bang, you'll be really survivable for a brief time. Now, it's worth mentioning this next set, and that's Perfected Coral Riptide. This is kind of like a boss ace of the 5-pieces, and when I say boss ace, when you lower your weapon and spell damage, you're going to get increased up to 470 weapon and spell damage based on the amount of stamina you have lacking. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of practice, and a lot of wherewithal to use this, but just keep in mind this is from the new trial Dreadcell Reef, and one of the items that's considered best in slot. Speaking of the items that considered best in slot also is Perfected World Depths. This is quote unquote a light armor intended for magic users, but what you can do is do jewelry and weapons similar to what you would do with Togvans. Put this on and have 1-piece light, and it's going to do a crazy amount of damage. It also has the light attack mechanic, so not perfect for everybody, but those two consider collecting if you have the High Isles and you want the best in slot items. These are alternatives. Okay, so now you're going to pair 2 5-pieces, and you're going to have an Oakensoul ring, and you'll kind of determine your skill loadout and what you're doing and why based on if you have the minor force buff. Now let's switch gears and talk about solo play and what I use for solo and why. So this guy is rocking 2 5-pieces I can't get enough of. Number 1 is Pillars of Nirn. This comes from Falkreath Hold. This does bleed damage in a big huge AoE, but is very easy to manage because it's just quote unquote when you deal damage. There's no light attack, there's no crit, there's no nothing, and it does a crazy amount of damage, and you don't have to babysit anything. It's very easy to get a hold of. The next set that I use is Vicious Ophidian. This is God mode sustain and carries your resources, reduces your cost of your stamina abilities, and when you kill an enemy, stamina and major expedition are given to you. So it can occur every 1 second. So if you're doing a bunch of ad pulls and VMA and Vanish Rank Molly, you're going to get this up at all times. Really, really good stuff here. Now it leaves a 1-piece, and so what I'd recommend doing is getting a 1-piece that adds pen and even using in the light armor. The reason why is light armor passive is going to give you a little pen, and especially playing solo, you have a 1-piece pen slot open. And this, Scoria, or Crags, also does a decent 1 line of offensive penetration. That will give you the most damage in a 1-piece that you can possibly have. So you'll have 5 pieces on, and that would be 2 jewelry, 2 weapons, daggers, and then 1 piece on the body, another 5-piece, and a 1-piece. That would make the solo build and or the build that you would use for the other 5 pieces. Scoria, Crags, both good alternatives. I talked about a craftable set being Order's Wrath. Another one to consider is New Moon's Acolyte. Adds a bunch of weapon and spell damage for the 5-piece. It does increase the cost of your active abilities by 5%, so it's a bit of a hit on resources, but if you're looking for a craftable option, this would be one. So now I'm going to pull up a gear chart. This is what I'd recommend for the average player that wants something they can get a hold of pretty easily and pretty simply after they've gotten a hold of Oakensoul. So I'd use Order's Wrath 5-piece if you want something not complicated and just just a craftable set, and combine that with Medusas. This is not going to be best in slot most damage, but it'll work at all times for the average player, and that's exactly what you want. I personally would run dual wheel with this setup, and I would not use an execute. I've tested both executes from Whirling Blades and Executioner. Don't find it as valuable as just maintaining the dots and keeping it simple. So I'd go dual wield, Nurn or Precise in your main hand, charge in your offhand with Poison and Flame glyphs. I would run Divines on the body traits, all of them, and Stamina glyphs. And then I'd run weapon damage and all of my glyphs depending on my resource sustain, my race, and my champion points. I would do 1 stamina recovery if I had concerns. The traits for the jewelry are a little bit up in the air. Infuse will actually do much better in shorter term fights. So if you're doing dungeons versus trials, Infuse is the way to go. If you're doing trials, if you're parsing, Bloodthirsty is the way to go in the jewelry traits. I typically go with Infuse. I'm not doing a whole lot of veteran hard mode trials, more or less solo arenas. And there you would have it. If you went the Medusas route, you'd have to have 1 heavy. If you go the other route, you might have 1 light and 6 medium, or you might have 7 medium, or even I've seen some people do 5 medium and 2 light. You gotta find the sweet spot. And 1 piece of light isn't bad considering that we're running 2 magic skills most of the time. And now we're gonna pull up an alternative. So this would be an alternative beginner setup if you did not have Oakensoul. And I set it up to be really, really tanky. So we've already talked about the Briarheart 5-piece. This is gonna give you a crap ton of healing from time to time. Now a Hexos Ward 5-piece. So that's going to be from the Deadlands DLC, and doing crit damage is going to give you a massive shield. This is what you need to survive at first until you get comfortable with the game. And since you're not using Oakensoul, you're not using a Mythic, that frees up a Monster Helm. I think the best overall survivability Monster Helm is Iceheart. Base game comes from Dire Frost, and when you do crit damage, you're going to get a chance to be a better damage shield. Those damage shields can benefit from the Bastion champion points as well. So really, you're going to be super tanky. This will get you by without being so frustrated, dying all the time. And then you can swap Briarheart, Hexos Ward, and the Monster Helm either for mythics or higher dealing damage sets that I've already mentioned. Let's talk about the miscellaneouses for this build, and I'm playing on an Orc. So Orc is primarily used for PvP. I like it, and especially for average or beginner players, it gives you increased max stamina with the Brawny. It gives you unflinching rage, increasing health, and when you deal damage, you get healed. This can only occur every 4 seconds, and you get increased weapon and spell damage. Really, the PvP angle here is reduced cost of sprinting and movement speed. So consider Orc a very sturdy race and a tanky one. It's not the most damage dealing. If you want the most damage dealing, I would definitely go with Khajiit. Khajiit would be the way to go. Secondarily, I would go with the Dark Elf. Dark Elf allows you to switch between magic and stamina and play both whenever you want very well and do very well in PvP. Attributes. If we go to my character's attributes, it's an obvious one here. I do 64 in attributes. Now I'm Orc, so I have a bit more health. I would say for the average player, aim around 22,000 to 23,000 health. However, you have your attributes spread. Reason why is if you play with 18,000, some of the top tier players play with that using Parse Food. That's great. But if you make one mistake, you're probably going to be dead. So having a little bit of cushion, you'll do less damage, but aiming for 22,000 will be a little bit more forgiving. Mundastone. So just in case you're unaware, there is a crit damage cap. This is going to be really important if you're running a Khajiit and some of these other things. So you have a base of 50. You need to add whatever this number is, so it's going to be 90, and then you need to actually go and see what it's like with your Barb Trap or your Togman's up, and see what the numbers with your champion point slottable as well. You do not want to go above 125% or it will be a dead stat. So really actually look inside of combat with Barb Trap or Togman's app with your race and everything maxed out and see where you are. And then adjust your Mundastone from there. With that being said, since I'm an Orc, I go with the Thief Mundastone. Since we're in this window, I go with Lava, Foot, Soup, and Salt Trace. This is what I consider Parse Food. When we say Parse Food, Lava Foot is the stamina version. It doesn't have any lines of magic. So it gives you one big, huge max stamina, and it gives you one huge, big stamina recovery. Now, thankfully, I'm on an Orc, and I got Undaunted maxed out and some other things, so I'm at 22,000 health, and this makes it really good to use Parse Food. You can see my static recovery is at 1900. Now, since I'm using Oakensoul, if I use a potion, I will get the major recovery on top of that. And then I'm at 2300 stamina recovery. Believe it or not, the magic recovery is quite important as well, using Oakensoul. Oakensoul if you're going to use the 2 magic ability setup. And you can see that's pretty high stamina recovery, since the Necro can struggle without 2 bars, sucking up and using Mortal Coil and using souls and all that. So I like this setup a lot. And that's why I use tripods. Again, you don't have to use weapon and spell power potions with Oakensoul, since you have it already built in, the minor ones, and you have the major crits and the major weapon damage buffs. So Crown Store ones or ones you buy on the trader is going to give you all the major buffs: major fortitude, intellect, and endurance, and you can suck them down every 45 seconds. You get to a 47.3 cooldown if you have this passive medicinal use maxed out. So for alchemy, what I did is I bought some crappy mats that no one really wanted, some poisons. I looked in my little alchemy thing here, and then I found like, oh, I got some alchemy mats that nobody wants. I'm sitting on a gazillion of this Outcast or whatever, and I just spammed about 400 of them and got from 1 to 400 right away. Do not sleep on this alchemy. So when your character hits 50, this build looks interesting. What you need to focus on is min-maxing your character, right? So it'll include leveling alchemy medicinal use, maxing out your race, getting the abilities like Razor Caltrops, Echoing Vigor, or Resolving Vigor, and Warhorn if you plan on tanking. And then you're going to go in the Fighters Guild as an obvious one you need to max out, including these passives. Mages Guild if you're going to use Shooting Star, or you can use Colo if you don't like it. Psijic Order is more for solo arenas and PvP. Undaunted is very important. So let's see why Undaunted is important. If I take these 2 passives, you're going to see I'm going to get increased 4% max stats. This here, Undaunted command, is extremely important. In raids and trials and dungeons, this is how you sustain. You don't necessarily need to use Lavafoot. You can rely on using synergies all the time. So having more synergies in your group means overall increased sustain for everybody versus Undaunted command. And then you need to focus on your armor, weapon, and class. So it's going to be a lot of skill points for you to min-max, but you won't regret it, especially with Undaunted. Now we're going to talk about champion points here. Green really doesn't affect combat very much. A couple that I like is Gifted Rider, War Mount, and Steed Blessing. Then you have a flex spot. Treasure Hunt is very good if you're an average or new player and you just need something to try to help you get some of these gear sets quicker. This will help you into chests get like weapons and jewelry better. Now we're going to come in the blue tree. So there's a lot to discuss in the blue tree. The 2 I just no-brainer, Wraithful Strike and Fighting Finesse. Backstabber is actually more crit damage by 2%, right? But you have to be at the back. You're playing with tanks and uncoordinated folks, or you're playing solo arenas. The 2%, in my opinion, is not worth it outside of a parse dummy or a sweaty veteran group. This, I don't have to do anything. I can just hit it to the front, to the flank. It doesn't matter, and it works. Now you have a couple different options for this. Master at Arms, I think, is a no-brainer. And then Deadly Aim is the one that you can be iffy. It's going to increase your light attack weaving, so if you're perfect with light attack weaving, great. If you're using the Scythe and Blast Bones primarily, you can swap out Deadly Aim for Biting Aura. That's also good. Or you can use whatever you want in this flex spot. But these are the 2 that most people go with, and you can flex in Biting Aura if you like. Now, average players, beginners, you're watching this. This is the #1 tip I can give you with champion points. Do not worry about these slottables and getting a gazillion CP. What you need to do is come in here, take Tire Discipline, get 10 in here, and then come down here, take 10 in Quick Recover, and then max out Preparation. Preparation gives you 10% damage reduction at all times in PvE. All time. That 10% stacks on top of major protection that you get with Oakensoul. You will be 1,000 times more tanky with this. Now, if you're also new, you come out to these ones here, like Untamed Aggression and Endless Endurance, because they don't require a path to get there, and even taking 1 point gives you some type of bonus. Not mid-max, or not meant for everyone at endgame, but the beginners, this is where you go. Moving on to the red tree. Speaking of beginners, these 3 right here, you can get, doesn't require a path, you can get them straight away. And I go with all 3, so increase max health, armor, and then recovery. And then one that's obvious is kind of over here, Bloody Renewal. There's not a whole lot else that you would choose from. One that you would if you're struggling with survivability and you're using Hexos Ward or using Ice Heart as Bastion. That will actually increase the shields that you have with those gear sets. So don't sleep on this one either. Well, gang, we covered a crap ton about this damn Necro, but I hope you got something out of this, learned something. It's a lot of fun playing with 1 bar, whether you're using Oakensoul or not. I feel like I can actually manage it and have fun in PvE, be very impactful, whether it's in a group or solo, and just have a good time. So I'm cranking out more of these 1 bar builds, and it's kind of funny, the classes I can't stand or don't really like, they're a lot more fun with Oakensoul Oakensoul because I feel like I don't have to babysit and manage things that I'm not good at, but it does give me a little bit of incentive to kind of go back to the drawing board and try those 2-bar builds, put a 2H on my back bar, slap on Carve and Stampede, and see if I can do even more damage. So I'll be working on those, but this is a good starting point to get more comfortable and fluid with the Blast Bones rotation, constantly casting and constantly keeping up those spirits and all those other things that you do. Also, if you like this video, please consider smashing that like. Also, come watch me live on twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming, where I play and interact with you in the community live. I also have a Patreon link down in the description below, so if you'd like to be featured in the end credits, that really does help me out, allow me to crank more of these YouTube videos out. But don't sleep on this class, one of the hardest hitting out there, one of the most fun, and I hope you got something out of this video. Till next time, thanks for watching.